Hi everyone, welcome to this session. Today we are going to talk about how to invoke Amazon Bedrock using an AWS Lambda function. Now, the way that this tutorial is going to go is we're going to show you how to set up an AWS Lambda function. We're going to show you how to connect it to Amazon Bedrock correctly, so you have the right permissions to be able to invoke an Amazon Bedrock endpoint. And then I'm going to show you how to actually invoke the Lambda function using the AWS Lambda functions URL feature. So the way that it looks is a little bit similar to this diagram. It's quite simple. We are going to start off by deploying this AWS Lambda function. When we do this, we do get this AWS Lambda URL with it. We do have to enable this. By default, you don't get a URL on your Lambda function. So we'll set that up. The next stage is to actually just connect the Lambda function to Bedrock. So being able to give your Lambda function permissions to call invoke model on Amazon Bedrock. It requires a little bit of tweaking with IAM, and we'll show you how to do that too. And then once it's set up, we'll be able to invoke the Lambda function using the URL. We'll call the Bedrock service, wait for the response, and then we'll send it back. Now, specifically in this tutorial, we're not going to talk about streaming necessarily. We're only going to focus on the sort of default buffered way of returning functions. We can do a future episode on streaming specifically if you prefer that. But for this, we just want to keep it simple so people can get started and start to make use of Bedrock in their applications. Here we are in the AWS console. The first thing we're going to do is check the region that we're in. Specifically for the region, we want to make sure that we're in a region that has access to the models that we want to make use of. It's important to know that not all Amazon Bedrock Foundation models are available in all regions. And so before you go ahead and build a project, it's important to know which models are available in which regions. We're going to make use of the Amazon Nova Lite LLM model, which is available through Bedrock, and it's in pretty much all of the regions. It's kind of more pervasive than some of the other models. We're also going to make use of cross-region inference because that will allow us to have a better experience when invoking models. I'll talk a little bit about cross-region inference in a bit, but for now, just the thing to know is that different features are available in different regions. I'm going to use Ireland because that's the closest to me. And you just got to make sure that you check the docs to see that you're in a region that supports your model. Right, so now we've chosen the region. The place we're going to go is up to the top. We're going to go to the Lambda console. Here in the Lambda console, we are going to go to create function. We're going to author from scratch, and we're going to choose a function name. So I'm just going to call it Bedrock Invoke. The runtime is the type of programming language that you want to have in this Lambda function. You can see if you open up this drop down, you can see there's a lot of different options available. I predominantly make use of Python, so we are going to go with the Python 3.13 runtime. The architecture is up to you to choose. I would recommend if you want to have a lower cost runtime, then ARM is better. But one of the trade-offs is that if you are developing this locally, you might have to make sure that the Lambda function code that you're running has the same architecture when you bundle it up and put it into the Lambda function. We're going to open up this change default execution role and just make sure that create a new role with basic Lambda permissions is enabled. So what this is going to do is when we create our Lambda function, it's going to automatically create a role with some of the permissions that are most commonly used with Lambda. So this includes CloudWatch. So when we invoke the function, we want to be able to see some logs. And there's a few other permissions that it will give to you out of the box. Next thing we want to look at is the additional configurations because we want to enable a function URL over here. What this is going to do is it's going to generate a unique URL for our Lambda function that we can then invoke using HTTP requests. So specifically, if we're building something into an AI workflow, or if we have some sort of webhook system that we want to use to invoke this application, we will want to have a URL. And this is a good way to just set that up very simply. Now, there are two types of authentication mechanisms you can use. You can use AWS IAM, which I'd recommend if you are using a production environment. But for this basic tutorial, we are just going to set it as none. I will just highlight that if you set it as none and this URL gets into the wrong hands, people can do nasty things like rack up a huge bill for you. So I would say just do it for the tutorial, and then afterwards I'll show you how to delete the function so that you don't incur any extra costs. But just be careful with these URLs, because if you are, for instance, vibe coding and you accidentally put it into your GitHub repo and it goes public, you could have some nefarious people sort of hit it multiple times, and that could cause you extra charges. So we'll leave it as none, and we will then go a little bit lower. Next, we have invoke mode, and there's two options here. We're going to stick with buffered because we just want to keep this quite simple for this tutorial. It's just kind of a getting started. So if you've ever used ChatGPT or Claude, you'll see sometimes that there's a response that comes back as the response is generating. So it kind of shows up on your screen, and as over time it kind of like fills itself out. So that would be a response stream. So what's happening in the background is actually the model is responding and sending data back to your client, and then your client is basically reading that and appending it to your screen. We're going to use buffered, which basically means that we're going to send the request. It's going to do the Bedrock invocation, and then it's just going to wait for a response and send the whole payload back to the requester. So there's a little bit of a difference here in that the buffered you have like a max size, whereas with response streaming you don't necessarily have a max size, but it's a little bit more complicated to implement on the front end. The rest we can keep as default. You can enable tags if you want to do specific cost allocation to the specific Lambda function project. I recommend using tags a lot, but if you don't want to, we can just keep those off for now, and we're going to hit create function. Now that our Lambda function has created, we get this little pop-up. We can just dismiss this. This is talking about how you would potentially code this function locally. We're not going to do that. We're going to just do it in the console. So we can just dismiss this for now. What you get then is the AWS Lambda function configuration, and that includes the code which we will update over here. So let's have a little look at the code. The way that it works is that you have one function. This one's called Lambda handler. You get two parameters, and these are just a default for AWS Lambda functions. You get the event, which will contain our HTTP request in a specific format. And the context is a little bit more about the environment that the Lambda function is running in. So for instance, it'll have things like the log groups that it's attached to. It'll have some of the permissions that the Lambda function has access to. And so it's more likely that you will use event a lot of the time, and quite rarely will you use context in your applications. What we're going to do is we're first going to invoke the function with a very minimal piece of code, just to show you how it works and the response that comes back. Then we will update the code, give Lambda the permissions to call Bedrock, and then we'll invoke it again and see the response that comes back, just so you get an idea of how you work with AWS Lambda and how you build an application using this interface. So for this, we are just going to type print, and we're going to just print out the event. But what the event comes in is it comes in a Python dictionary. So what we're going to do is, just to make it easier for us to read, we're going to do this JSON dumps function. We're going to put event like that. We're going to remove this to-do implement. And so what we're doing is we're just basically going to print out this event to our logs. And this is how we're going to figure out what our event looks like, what the payload looks like. And this is especially good for troubleshooting that you do this, because you might want to see what the request payload comes from your third party or from your other applications. So with the code updated, we are just going to hit this deploy button. And it will take a few seconds, and you'll get this green bar saying successfully deployed. And that's pretty much it to set up a Lambda function. What we're going to do now is invoke it using our Lambda URL. So you can scroll up And in the top right here, we actually have the function URL over here. You can see it's just kind of like a random string followed by the Lambda URL in domain. So we're going to copy that, and I'm going to go over to a terminal. What we're going to do now is we're going to invoke the function URL, and that is going to accept our HTTP request, and then it's going to pass it to our Lambda function. And then what we're going to do is go and have a look at the logs for our Lambda function to go and see that request. So the first thing we're going to start off with is a GET request. So to do that, I'm going to use a tool called HTTP. It's a very cool tool that I recommend you use if you are a fan of Python. It goes like this. You go HTTP and you just provide the URL. And I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to do a GET request. And you can see it comes back pretty quickly. And we have hello Lambda, hello from Lambda, which is what we have in our code base over here. And this is what it's being returned. The things to note here is that the content type is actually application JSON. Even though it doesn't look like a normal JSON object, it's still returning application JSON, which is important because with third-party applications, you might want to pass this response as JSON. And especially if you're using things like N8N or Make, you definitely want to have that JSON enabled. The next thing we're going to do is a post request. So to do that, you just need to provide the body that's going to go into the request. And to do that with HTTP, you just do something like this. So I'm going to just do prompt. And then in the prompt, I'm going to provide a prompt, which we will then connect up and send to Bedrock. But for now, we're just going to put in the prompt and see what happens in the logs. So the prompt I'm going to use is write me a fantasy story about a village on an island. I'm doing this because I'm based in London and it is a village on an island. So let's see what we can do. So we do the same, hit enter. We get the same response, but that's because in our code, we've got the same response for all of our requests. But the difference will be is that when we go and look at the logs, we'll see the difference between a GET request and a POST request. And then we'll be able to figure out how to write our code to actually invoke our Bedrock model. Here we are back in the AWS Lambda function console. What we're going to do next is we are going to go and have a look at the logs for this function so we can go and see those requests that we've made to the Lambda function URL. The way we do that is we go over to this tab called Monitor. And if we open that up, we will see that there are a couple of metrics that are already provided. You can see things like the number of invocations. You can see things like duration. It's a bit different because during the recording, I've done a few tests. So you might see more than one in this example, but this is where you would see things like error rates, latencies, things like that. Specifically, throttles is also an important one. But what we're looking at is we're going to look at the logs. So we need to go up to the top right here, and we're going to click View CloudWatch Logs. Clicking that function has gotten us to the Amazon CloudWatch Logs console. And what we can see is there is a single log stream. As you deploy new versions of the Lambda function, it will deploy a new sort of isolated context for each function. And so you will see different log streams being created for each one of those contexts. Also, when your Lambda function has been quiet for a while and you invoke it for the first time, you'll see new log streams. And basically this log stream, each one represents a specific context of a Lambda function that's been created. And so if you specifically scale up a Lambda function, you'll see that there's a lot more log streams that get created. What we're going to do is we're going to click on the first one here. What we get here is the logs from our Lambda function, because remember we did that print. And if I open up one of these, you can see that it's because we've printed it with that JSON dumps, it's actually giving us a nice way to look through our logs. What we can see here is I've called it a few times in making this tutorial, but the two ones that we want to look at are these two last ones. The first one here is this GET request. And if we have a look at what the payload looks like, remember this is in our function, this is the event. and it's a dictionary in Python. So what we can see is we get some of the headers that would have come from the HTTP request. This is important if you ever want to do things like check for API keys. And we also get the request context, which gives things like our account ID, the API ID, and more specifically for us, we've got HTTP and the method, and we've get a few pieces of information about the HTTP request. Because of the GET request, we don't have any body, so we don't get any sort of variables that we have to pass out. So GET requests are usually good for just fetching some data. So if you wanted to go and fetch information in your workflows, you can go and do that with a GET request. The next thing we're going to look at is the POST request. Let's just close this here. So in our POST request, you can see that it's pretty much the same. The only difference being this HTTP method has changed. And we also get this body. And you can see that this body is actually encoded in a specific JSON format. And that's because if we look at the headers, we can see that the content type that was received is application JSON, which is good. And we are receiving a payload body, which is in a JSON format. This is important because when you're passing between the request and your Lambda function, you do need to change it between this string into a Python dictionary. And you don't necessarily need to do it the other way, but it's important to know that it comes in this format when you are writing your function code. As I said, this is a good way to debug your function, and anytime you do a print, it will appear in this log. And so when you're building your application or building your Lambda function, it's a good resource to have a look at while you are troubleshooting. Now that we've looked at the logs, let's go back to the Lambda console. Here we are back in the AWS Lambda console. We are now going to provide permissions for our Lambda function to invoke our Amazon Bedrock models. And the way that we do that is by applying a permission to our Lambda's IAM role. And the way we do that is we go over to this configuration over here. This is all happening within the same Lambda sort of console. We can see the code there in the configuration. And we'll go on the left down to permissions. And as we can see here, because we created that role initially, or we let AWS Lambda create that role, it's actually provided a role with CloudWatch logs, and that is actually some of the basic permissions that Lambda needs to write those logs that we just saw. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to click on this little role name over here, and that's going to take us to the AWS IAM console. And this is where we're going to be able to update the permissions that our Lambda function has. Here from the IAM console, we can see the permissions that our AWS Lambda function already has. So over here, we can see the permissions policies. And if we just click this, we can see that it's already being granted permissions to do put log events and create log stream. So that's what's given this Lambda function the permissions to write logs to CloudWatch that we just looked at earlier. What we're going to do is we're going to add another policy. You can either create your own policy over here on the left. You can create an inline policy, which is basically just applying a policy just to this role. Or we can use an AWS provided managed policy. What we're going to do for this use case is we're going to use an AWS managed policy because they come baked in with some of the best practices, and it's just going to be easier to set up for this short tutorial. To do that, we're going to go to add permissions, and we're going to go to attach policies. So here we get a list of all of the different policies that are available, and you can see here from the type that a lot of them are AWS managed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just search for Bedrock. And the one I'm going to use for this tutorial is the Amazon Bedrock Limited Access. And if I open it up, you can see that the main action that we're interested in is this Bedrock Invoke model. So as long as we've got this permission, it's going to allow our Lambda function to invoke the models in Amazon Bedrock. So with that selected, I just have to go to add permissions. And now we've got permissions granted to our AWS Lambda function. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to our Lambda function console. Here we are back in the AWS Lambda console. So now that we've granted permission to our function to access Amazon Bedrock, there's a couple more things we need to do. The next one is that we need to update the code, and we can do that over here back in the code section here. What we're going to do is update this code to invoke our Amazon Bedrock endpoint. I've got it just prepared in GitHub that you can go and copy. It's linked below. I'll just copy it over like so. And I'll just show you a little bit of what it does. It's very simple. It's still got our print. It's creating a Bedrock client using Boto 3. Because of we're using the Python runtime, it does have Boto 3 built in. So what we are going to do is create a Bedrock client. The Lambda handler is the same. We're printing it out the same. Here is how we are decoding that body, because remember our JSON input is that string. That's it's JSON formatted, but it's not opened out as a dictionary. We'll get the prompt from there. So that's specifically, we're looking for the prompt variable within our body. Here's the system list. So this is the system prompt. So this is how you give the language model its sort of persona, or the task that it's doing. So we've set here to act as a creative writing assistant, writing a story. This is what you will customize. Next, we have the message list, which has the prompt from the user. So we've added the prompt in over here. And if you want to know more information about how to prompt models, you'll have to go into the docs, because different models are prompted in different ways. We are specifically using Invoke model, which is a more raw form of invoking a Bedrock model. And so you will need to go and have a look at how the body needs to be for that specific model. We bundle everything into a request body. Here we have things like the top P, top K, temperature. I'll leave that up to you to go and have a look at what those mean for the model. For instance, temperature is kind of like a gauge on creativity. And then this is the main crux of the code. We are calling invoke model. We have our body here. We're setting it as content type as JSON, and we're setting the model ID. And then the rest is just writing the response into a JSON object, and then we return it with our status code 200. We've also added a print here, just so that you can have a look at the response. Again, this is for troubleshooting. You might want to have a look at what the body looks like before you go and coerce it into a different format for your Lambda response. What we'll look at next is the model ID. You can see that we've provided Amazon Nova Lite. You can go and have a look at the AWS docs to see what different model IDs are available for use with Amazon Bedrock. We are specifically using the cross-region inference feature. What this means is that when we invoke the model, it's not always a guarantee that the model will be served in a region, in the same region as the AWS Lambda function. So this is important because, especially if you're dealing with a restricted environment where you have to be careful about personal information not crossing borders, you might want to just double check that you are able to use this. It's also recommended to use cross-region inference because if you don't use it and you try and invoke Amazon Nova and there's not enough capacity, you'll get an error. And so you get a bad or a worse experience when you don't use cross-region inference. But if you want to keep your data in a specific region, you need to make sure that you don't enable it. So that's the last of our code. We are just now going to go and click deploy. So that's going to create a new version of our function. And after a few seconds, we'll see that it's successfully deployed. The last thing we're going to do before we leave the AWS Lambda console is we are going to configure the Lambda function timeout. The thing with invoking language models is sometimes it can take a bit of time for the response to come back. And if you don't increase the time for a Lambda function to basically handle that request, you can sometimes get the case, or in most times you'll get the case that the Lambda function will finish and you won't get any response, and you'll just get an error in when you invoke your function. So the way we do that is we go over to configuration again. We go to general configuration on the left. From here, we can see that there's a couple of configuration options. We're going to hit edit. And in here, we are just going to change this timeout. And for this tutorial, I'll just recommend 30 seconds. And the rest you can keep as default and hit save. So that is the configuration set for our Lambda function. The last thing I just want to show you is where you can go and find the inference profiles for different models. So remember I spoke about cross-region inference. Sometimes when you go and look at the docs, you might not get necessarily the inference profile for that model. So the way you can go and find that is if we go over back to Bedrock and we hit from the Bedrock console, we can go over to the left to cross-region inference. And this is where you can find all of the inference profiles for different models. So first of all, this is specifically for models that are enabled for cross-region inference. If I go here, I go to model and I type Nova, Nova Lite. You can see here, this is the profile ID, and this is the profile ID that we've provided as our model ID inside of our code. You can see from this profile, if we open it out, that there are a number of regions where your requests will be serviced. So remember what I said about specifically if you're working with restricted data. This might be okay if you're working within the EU, because if we are in Ireland and there's a chance that your request will be serviced from any of these regions. So that's Paris, Ireland, Frankfurt, and I think that's Stockholm. I don't know why it's not showing up correctly. But that's just important to bear in mind, because especially if you're working within a regulated environment, you need to just double check that you are allowed to move data into these different regions. So that's basically it. The last thing we want to do is go and invoke our Lambda function and see what we get as a result. So remember, we previously invoked our function. We didn't have any code in there. We're just going to go and do the same. I'm going to provide the prompt, the same prompt as we did before, and I'm going to hit enter. Now remember, it's doing an invocation of Bedrock, which takes a bit of time, as I mentioned. And you can see that the response that comes back is our JSON payload. You can see content type application JSON at the top, and you can see the response here. It's got our story that Nova has created for us. So from here, you'd be able to parse it in your applications or whatever tool you're using to invoke through your webhook. You can see a few other pieces of information, like the reason why it stopped was max tokens, so it reached the maximum amount of tokens. You can get some counts on output tokens, total tokens. So this can help to, if you're doing some sort of billing within your application, you might want to record that as part of your billing mechanisms. That's basically it for the tutorial. We've been able to create a Lambda function. We've been able to connect it to Amazon Bedrock, and then we've been able to invoke it and get a response from Amazon Bedrock. The last thing I want to show you is just how to clean everything up so you don't incur any more costs once you finish this tutorial. To do that, we go back to our console. Here in our console, we will go back to our Lambda console. And it's quite simple. We just hit this little checkbox. We can go actions. We can delete. And then we just type confirm and delete. With that deleted, I can go back and show you what will happen if we just try and invoke it. We'll just get a forbidden, which is a generic response from the Lambda URL. The last thing you can do is if you want to go into IAM, you can go and delete that role too. There's no cost for having an IAM role just hanging about. So you don't necessarily need to do that, but we can go to roles over here. If you're a bit of a perfectionist like me, We called it Bedrock Invoke. I've made one before, but I'll just delete both of them, and you just hit delete and delete. So now we've deleted the roles as well. That's basically it, so you won't incur any other costs. Great, that's it for today's session. Hopefully it's been useful. Hopefully you've learned something from this. If you have any requests for other videos in the future, so if you wanted to look at how you do streaming responses, if you want to look at how you potentially log the tokens in DynamoDB, I'd be happy to do those. Just give me a little bit of a nudge what you'd like to see. Until next time, have a good time building on AWS, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.